Okay, thank you very much for accepting me my abstract. What I'm about to present you is a work in progress. So everything is not totally formalized and finished and well polished and so on. And so I'd be happy if there were feedbacks to help me improve my work. And I'm gonna ask a very simple question: is what does space mean? And the work I'm in today relies on three hypotheses. Our first goal was to have a reflection about mobility studies, because my colleague Bertrand Montulet, who's working with me, and I do think that there's a need to widen the scope of mobility studies. And our three hypotheses are these. First one, we are facing a new way of seeing space and time, and thus mobility. The idea is that we face a shift of social representations of space and time. Thus, it's here about representations of space and time, not real space or real time. This is not about this. So the space I'm speaking about is also social space, conceptual space, moral space, whatever you want. Everything that can be described as a space. Second hypothesis is that mobility is a concept able to enlighten lots of social behavior. Because if you assume that spaces can be multiple in the society, you can assume that the question of mobility is an interrogation to family, moral conception, political conceptions, and so on. So the scope can be wide, and this is one of the benefits of, we think, of our reflection, is to try to insert mobility studies, geographical mobility studies, in a broader interrogation of mobilities today. Third hypothesis is that we face a shift in ideology. I mean a discourse, a prescriptive and descriptive discourse, which impacts the way we conceive mobilities. Thus here I'll talk about discourses, not practices. It's really important to keep the distinction clear, because, or as clear as possible, because if discourses impacts on practices, it's not because there's a new discourse, even a new overwhelming discourse, that practices do change radically. So it's about space and time. Why? Because mobility is just a displacement in space through a certain amount of time. I think that, first of all, we must conceive that we are facing new experiences of social spaces and times. Two examples. When we work with ICTs, with this or my iPad, or I don't know, we face new experiences of space and times. It's very simple to understand. When I'm here with the Wi-Fi, I can just check my mails, and it's just like if I was at home, because at home it's just as if I was at work, because I work at home. So we have a new experience which imposes itself to us, excuse me. Another example concerning a question of time, it's the beginning and the end of the life. At the beginning of the life, in the former 50 years ago, a child was born and everybody waited to see if he was living and if he would live. And at the end of the life, suddenly they said, he doesn't breathe anymore, and everybody knew he was dead. But today, the experience of these two ontological momentums in man's life are considerably different, because when a child is born, we have to decide if he's alive or not, and we can bring him alive if he's born too early, and we face the question of, is he alive or not? Will he live or not? Will I decide that he will live? And it's the same at the end of the life. I don't have to remind Ariel Sharon, which is who is a good example, because he's cerebrally dead, but he's still in a hospital. So is he alive? Is he dead? We face new experiences of time, and this is very striking, I think, because these two instances were the most important, those who were part of our destinies. But we also build new relationships with spaces and times. For example, the confusion between private and public spaces. It depends on new experiments, but it depends also on social conventions, on social agreements. What is legitimate? Is it legitimate to be called at work by my wife asking me if I can go and pick up the children at school? Is it legitimate to check my professional mails at home in the evening? These questions are part of a new way of building spaces in our societies. And this confusion is the confusion we build. It's possible because we have ICTs, but it's also possible because we want to do this. We want to modify our Facebook status at work just because we thought about the party we had yesterday in the evening. It's the same for time. So spaces and times, we do practice we do have new ways of using spaces and times, and of conceiving spaces and times. And these constructions have a lot to do with legitimacy. It depends on what we think is legitimate to do or not to do. Talking about time, there's an important question, is the question of borders. Bertrand Montullet and I have imagined two opposite models, two ideal types, which are ideal types, no realities, an encourage-based model and a mobilitarian one. What is the encourage-based model? It's based on separated spaces as territories and static time as eras. I explain. Space is seen as a vertical and horizontal succession of spaces characterized by their borders and inner uniformities. Inside the border, it's always the same. To take an example, the space of men, the gender. What is a man? What is a woman? In this model, man is conceived as something surrounded by a border. They are men and non-men, male and non-male. I should say, I think. Excuse me, but in French it's more confused. There's male and non-male, and inside everything which is male. That's it. So there's an inner uniformity and a closed border. What is the time that corresponds to this space? It's a static time, based on an era. Because if you want to say that there's an uniformity inside a space, you have to stop time, because time makes things change. And so if you say, this city is in this area, and it stops here, you have to say, it's not forever, but it's for a long time, and this new house there, yeah, but it's outside. It's not the city. And this other one, no, not. It's outside. So you have to stop time if you want to preserve your border and your inner uniformity. So what is mobility in this context? Mobility is seen as a trip through and to different territories. It implies border crossings and temporal ruptures. Because you go somewhere else where you'll belong to, in a new era that's opening. If you think about social mobility, you want to make a rise in your social position. So you want to quit one social position to gain another one, and to belong to this new position, and to open a new era in your life by being from a little bourgeoisie to a great bourgeois, I would say. Okay, for instance. Thus, mobility is very specific. It's a teleological mobility. What's the other model, the mobilitarian one? It's made of continuous spaces, seen as expanses, and flowing time based on a permanent present. Space is then seen as a continuum of interpenetrated expanses. Between Prato and Firenze, what's the difference? Where is the limit? If you see it on Google Maps, you see that there are houses everywhere. So, in this case, you can just conceive that the two cities are interpenetrating themselves, them. Yes, one another. Thank you. So, there are no fixed borders, no inner homogeneity anymore. It's a continuum, and there's more center, more peripheral, but not inside or outside. Spaces are defined by their relationships and not by their borders. Time is thus a flow, a constant flow, because it changes all the time, and so you don't have any references to clear eras and clear ruptures in the time. Okay? What can be mobility in this way of thinking space and time? It's utopia and uchrony. It's in absence of spatial and time reference marks, the nature of mobility changes. It becomes both inevitable and erratic. If everything changes constantly, if there are no clear borders, if you're in a continuum, you are always moving. And if you think that you stay at the same place, it's just the space around you that moves. You thought that you were living outside the city, and one day you realize that you are in the city. This is this idea. Your house didn't move, but the space around you did. So, mobility can't be teleological, because everything's always moving. And if you fix a goal, when you get to this place, you see that the goal has itself moved to anywhere else. So, these two models we try to apply to the representations of mobility today. I'll talk a little bit about structures, even if structure is not the correct term to speak about something that is very net-based. So there is an opposition between these two models, between a pyramid and a net. A pyramid which is position-based, and a net which is relation-based. So in the encourage-based model, people and entities are defined by their position and their hierarchies. Positions are horizontally and vertically defined, like in a pyramid. In a mobilitarian model, position can't be defined anymore by reference to positions, to clear positions. So it's a question of relations, like in a net. A net is not a structure. A net is a whole bunch of possibilities of communication. Maybe you don't communicate, but the net is the possibility to communicate, to link to another position, another. We say un nœud in French, so it's a node in a net. I don't know if it's correct in English. Yeah, a node. Okay, thank you. The discourse we are talking about, the mobilitarian ideology, has two sides, we think. as three sides. Excuse me. It describes a reality. The descriptive side of the discourse has about pointing at the net-based functions in society. But it also prescribes social practices by saying it's good to be organized like a net. Everybody has heard about you should work in a net. There is no place anymore for hierarchies and so on. You should be just partner in a common project, using the net to communicate and to exchange information. So it's a prescription too, because if we're told to do this, we will tend to do it. It also hides the encourage-based practices, because by seeing everything through a net grid, so to say, we tend to forget about the hierarchies. It's just the same at the university. Yeah, we are all partners, but there are stronger partners than the others. And when you have to have a renewal of your contract, you know that one guy will sign, and this man has the power, and there is a pyramid. But it's hidden by a discourse about the net. So we think we are in a situation of the rise of a new discourse, and this discourse is really overwhelming, but practices are mixed between encourage-based and net-based practices. So I said it's about legitimacy. If we modify, if the way we perceive space and time is modifying, then it modifies the way we conceive the legitimacy of certain social practices. There's a move from a space-centered model to a time-centered one. We shift from a model within which the space comes first and time tends to immobility to a model without space, everything being time-centered. We tend to see ourselves as driven by the flood in place of sailing across the sea towards new continents. Thus, mobilities are seen as natural and inevitable. Movement is natural, and this assumption, one century ago, you would have heard that what makes humanity is culture, and culture is rules, is limits, is a struggle against nature, and thus the creation of borders between the good and the evil, and so on. Today, you will hear a lot of discourses about the common dignity of humanity based on capacity of mobility, of adaptation, and so on, and in terms of capacity to be free from any limits. Movement is at the principle of life and of human dignity. This is legitimacy. Mobilities are about spaces, not only physical. So if mobility is good, mobility is not only good physically, but also morally, professionally, and so on. In this discourse, mobilities are praised for themselves. I recently heard we have to make mobility less unattractive. But why should we? We should do this, and it's said as an evidence, as something normal. You can discuss about this, but the question which is never asked is, why should we be mobile? What should mobility be attractive? Yesterday I heard your intervention. I was really interested by your colleagues saying, yeah, I work here for 15 years and it's too long. I should be moving somewhere else. And in fact, 50 years ago, people would have said, yeah, I'm here for 15 years and I hope that I'll die at work, being having made the longest. Well, what?
Get a gold watch.
Yeah, that was it. Get the golden watch. So mobilities are praised for themselves, and immobility is seen as abnormal, as morally condemnable. Who is immobile? Is the weak one, the lazy one, and so on. If you hear the discourses about workless people, they are stigmatized not only because they don't have any job, but because they are doing just nothing. If they are looking for a job, even if there is no job to find, then they are good workless people. And so immobility is morally condemnable. We think there's a need for an analysis of this discourse and not only of the practices of mobility. How could I define more precisely mobilitarian ideology? By referring to 4 imperatives, 2 groups. First group of imperatives, the imperatives related to the management of the self. First imperative, activity. Just do it. Be active, no matter what you do. Would it be private, public, professional, recreative? Activity is a principle of life. If you are a human being, you must do something. Do something external. No contemplation, no inner life. That doesn't interest. Activity, just do it. Activation, do it by yourself. Activation in French is one of the most common words nowadays, because you must activate everybody. Prisoners, workless people, everybody must be activated, even workers who maybe wouldn't be enough active in their factories. Everybody must be activated. What does this mean? It means that initiative must be yours, or at least the principle of movement must come from you. Activate yourself or be activated, but don't be acted. No discipline, no imposition of every move, no Taylorism. You must be the principle of your movement. You should be. This was for management of the self. What do you have to do with yourself? Now, what do you have to do with your social relations? Participation. Participation is the key word. You have to be part of it. Because if society is perceived as a net, if the network is the valued metaphor of social relations, the linked imperative is to be part of it, be part of the network. This imperative is founded on a project-based social coordination. No question of belonging to a structure, a university, a family, whatever you want. You just have to manage your life on a project-based system. You have to be able to go from a project to another one. For instance, if my grandmother had told to a friend of her that she was really sad with her husband, she would have told her, yeah, but you married him, it's for life. Just keep it, and maybe when he will be old, he will be calmer and it will be easier. If today anyone says to his or her best friend, yeah, it's very awful at home, they answer, yeah, you're still young. Why don't you make a new family project? Well, don't you go and see somewhere else if the grass is not greener and if the sun doesn't shine in the other house. So this project-based system discourse is present not only in management, but also, for instance, in family. This is the collective apprehension of activity. Be part of it. But to be part of something, you must adapt to the context. So you have to be flexible. If you're required to participate, if you have to integrate the net, you have to be flexible. No principles, no limits, no prohibitions, but availability. One day working for Handicap International, tomorrow working for an armament plant. Why not? It's just a project, and you have to be flexible. Of course, this all is a discourse, and it's an ideological discourse, so it has uses. Social structures, hierarchies, specialization, stability do work, but are conceived as illegitimate. I'm now working on prison. And prison is really interesting because it's one of the most difficult things in society to legitimate. You put someone in jail for 20 years, you know that he will go out mad for more than one century. Everybody says it doesn't work, it's awful, but it's still there. So there's a strong legitimation discourse, and I'm now studying the legitimation discourse through parliamentary documents about prison. And it's really interesting to see that even this anchorage-based institution is legitimated and described through mobilitarian discourses about the need to activate prisoners, to help them to reform themselves, the need to make everyone participate to the wonderful project of the prison, and so on and so on. So social structure do function, but are no longer legitimate and are hidden between, behind discourses, mobilitarian discourses. The language range which is concerned is about flexibility, net, personal initiative, horizontal relationships, and so on and so on. Thus, there's a combination of mobilitarian discourses and pyramidal structures. And in this context, ideology is a resource. What for? Mobilitarian ideology results in tests on social actors to credit them with a social status, like the Boltanski and Capello said in Le Nouvel Esprit du Capitalisme. What is this? It's just a test of mobility to see if you have the dignity to be a great, as Boltanski and Capello call them. Positive status for mobile persons, negative for immobile one. These tests rely on constraints which present a hardness, because there is no ordeal if there is no hardness. And hardness, thus suffering. What are these sufferings linked to the mobilitarian ideology? 3 forms of suffering. The first one is when there's a gap between the internalization of ideology and the mobility practices. First, impeached or unreachable mobility. The first possibility is that you have integrated the demand of mobility, and you think that it's really legitimate. You should move, you should, but you can't. Or you can't because, for instance, you have children and your boss tells you, yeah, you should work a little bit harder to get a higher status. And you say, yeah, maybe I could do it, but with my children, I got to pick them at school. I don't want to work the weekend and so on. And so there's an impeached mobility. There's also an unreachable mobility. And this may concern hypermobiles, which can be permanently frustrated because they tend to a perfect mobility, but they never reach it. There's always an obstacle. There's always something somewhere which impedes them of being totally mobile, totally nowhere. Okay? The other possibility is imposed mobility. It's the reverse. You don't integrate the mobility principle, but you're forced to do it. For instance, the manager obliged to go abroad to preserve his position in his company, or the researcher who has to come to Prato to talk to colleagues in order to show his boss that he is a good researcher. Prato is no, I know. It's just an example. Nobody suffers. Okay, this was the first form. Second one, difficulties to impose a certain perception of one's mobilities. Because the sense of mobility, the difference between mobile and immobile, is just derives from social interaction. There is no mobile or immobile. Everything is relative. So the question is, can you get the mobility label you need? First possibility is the feeling that mobilities are developed in vain. Unqualified workless can take 2 buses for a bad job, but he won't be recognized as mobile. But we do, we who come here in a pleasant city in Italy. So there's a problem when you work hard to be mobile and you are not recognized as mobile. The other possibility is the impossibility to consider his immobilities as legitimate or excusable. Your immobilities can be legitimate, but they can be illegitimate. And there's a social game around this so that some people can recognize that their immobilities are legitimate, but yours are not. And there is a social game and possibility for sufferings. Third possibility, third possibility is the fake. The importance of the sign implies that some will have to pretend mobility. And this pretension can cause tensions. And because you have to hide your immobilities, you have to say, yes, I'm ready to work whenever you want to get this job, just praying, oh, please, he doesn't have to ask me anything the weekend for the birthday of the kid. Okay? Yeah, a lot of examples around kids. Maybe it's something personal. Should ask the question. So, third form of suffering is the cost of motility, a concept of Kaufman. To be mobile, you have to undergo costs related to the acquisition of potential mobility, which is motility. You have to be able to acquire accessibility, which is conditions to access a mobility offer, competencies, which are necessary to use a mobility offer, and appropriation, to make the link between one's need and the offers. And you know that when you have to travel, for instance, and when you have someone to say to just organize everything for me, thank you, or when you have to check for 3 or 4 buses to go to work on your own, there's a difference, and this is the cost of motility. So I come to my conclusion. If the meaning of space and time changes, so does our perception of mobility. We thus, I think, shift from an encourage to a mobilitarian model. There's also a shift of sufferings from the bad position syndrome to the self-manager anxiety. And I think that physical mobilities have to be understood in this broader context, because almost everything I said about general mobilities are, I think, can be applied to geographical mobilities. I thank you.
Okay, so it's time for questions.